It was the summer that dried a town to its bones, a drought so harsh it cracked the earth, and cracked the people's lives along with it. In the small farming town of Waverly, Oklahoma, something long buried was about to resurface. An old well, a forgotten farmhouse, and a secret that would shock the world. 6 bodies. 1 survivor. And a mystery that would haunt the town forever. This is the chilling story of Willow Farm. It started with a drought. The kind that makes everything feel brittle, lawns turning to straw, lakes shrinking into muddy puddles, and people getting just a little meaner in the heat. That summer, in the small farming town of Waverly, Oklahoma, the rain hadn't fallen in nearly 5 months. Wells that had provided water for generations were drying up, and people were getting desperate. The drought hit hardest on the outskirts, where the land stretched wide and flat. That's where Willow Farm sat, about 40 acres of withered crops, an old white farmhouse, and a hand-dug well that had been there since before the Civil War. By July, the farm's owner, a widower named Richard Hale, was hauling water in from town every other day. But one morning, something strange happened. The ground around his old well started to give way. The warped boards covering it split under his weight. When he looked down, he realized the water was gone, but there was something else in the darkness below. A smell. Richard thought maybe an animal had fallen in and died. Coyotes sometimes wandered close, desperate for water. So he called the sheriff's office, not for an emergency, but just in case. "Smells like something rotting down there," he told them. "Could be a deer." Sheriff's Deputy Nora Briggs came out that afternoon. The heat shimmered off the dry grass as she walked across the property, boots crunching through dust. She was young, mid-30s, new to the job, and she took the report seriously. She leaned over the mouth of the well, shining a flashlight into the darkness. At first, she couldn't see much. The beam caught on something pale and smooth. Then, as her eyes adjusted, the shape became clearer. It wasn't a deer. It was a hand. What followed would shake Waverly to its core. Within an hour, the sheriff's department had taped off the area. Crime scene investigators from Tulsa arrived that evening, setting up floodlights that turned the dry fields into a ghostly stage. The well was about 40 feet deep and just wide enough for one person to squeeze through. It had to be excavated by hand, layer by layer. They found the first body the next morning. It was badly decomposed, a woman, estimated to have been down there for at least a decade. Her clothes were little more than rags, but a delicate silver ring still clung to one finger. By sunset, they'd found a second body. Then a third. And by the end of the second day, there were 6. 6 bodies, stacked like forgotten history, preserved in the damp shadows beneath Willow Farm. The town went into shock. Waverly had always been quiet. No major crimes in decades. People left their doors unlocked. Suddenly, every conversation was about the well. Every rumor turned darker than the last. The victims seemed to span years. One was so decomposed she was little more than bone. Another, far more recent, still had soft tissue. Clothing styles didn't match. Some looked like they'd been there since the early 2000s, others, maybe only a few months. But there was one more thing, something no one expected. On the third night of recovery, as the last body was being lifted out, one of the forensic techs heard a noise. A low, gurgling rasp echoing from the bottom of the shaft. They thought it was gas release or air pressure. But when the deputy leaned over and called down, a faint, broken voice answered. "Help me." Everything stopped. For the next 2 hours, rescuers worked frantically to widen the well and lower a medic down. They found her curled between 2 decomposing bodies, her skin pale, her hair matted with mud. Barely conscious. Barely alive. Her name was Lily Cross. She was 19 years old. She'd been missing for 6 days. When the ambulance carried her away, half the town watched from the road. Some people cried. Others just stood there in stunned silence, because now this wasn't a story about the past anymore. It was happening right now. Lily's survival was impossible. She'd been trapped in a well for nearly a week, with minimal oxygen, surrounded by decaying bodies, and no food or water. Doctors said it was a miracle she was alive at all. But her condition was fragile. She drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling fragments that didn't make sense. At first, investigators thought she might be suffering from delirium. But as she began to stabilize, her words started forming a story. And that story would unravel everything. She told detectives she hadn't fallen in by accident. She'd been pushed. According to Lily, she'd been working part-time at a roadside diner a few miles from Willow Farm. One night after closing, a man she knew, someone local, had offered her a ride home. He was older, in his 50s. Kind of quiet. The kind of guy everyone trusted. But instead of taking her home, he'd driven her out to the farm. She said she didn't remember exactly how she got out of the truck, just that she was suddenly standing near the well, and then, nothing. When she woke up, it was dark. She was trapped. She screamed until her throat gave out. No one came. Then, as her eyes adjusted, she saw them, shapes around her. At first she thought they were people sleeping. Then she realized they weren't moving. That's when she said she saw the ring of light above her disappear. Someone had replaced the cover. And she heard the voice of the man who'd brought her there. He said something she'd never forget. Now you belong with the others. The problem was, Lily couldn't remember his name. Or maybe she wouldn't say it. Detectives went through every missing persons case from the past 20 years, trying to match the recovered remains. They identified 4 women, all reported missing between 2006 and 2021. One was a teenage runaway. One was a single mother from Tulsa. One was a traveling nurse who vanished on her way home. And one, this one hit hardest, was the sheriff's own niece, who disappeared 3 years earlier. Each had vanished within a 100-mile radius of Waverly. None of their cars had ever been found. Then came the biggest break. While analyzing soil samples from the well, investigators discovered traces of concrete dust and automotive lubricant, substances not naturally occurring on a farm. They traced them to a small auto repair shop on Route 17, owned by a man named Douglas Hale. Richard Hale's younger brother. Douglas was a quiet man. Lived alone. Worked long hours. He had no criminal record, but something about him unsettled people. He was the kind of guy who smiled too long and didn't blink enough. When police searched his property, they found what they were looking for. In a locked shed behind the garage were women's purses, jewelry, and driver's licenses, some belonging to the victims found in the well. There were also photographs. Hundreds of them. Each photo showed a woman, bound and terrified, inside what looked like a wooden box. That box, investigators realized, was the old well, before it had caved in. The arrest was quiet. They found Douglas sitting on his porch, drinking coffee, as if he'd been waiting. When asked if he understood the charges, he just nodded and said, "It's dry this year. I knew they'd find them eventually." In interviews, Douglas spoke about the killings like they were chores. Routine. He said he never planned to keep the bodies. It was just the easiest place to put them, he told detectives. The well was already deep. But the strangest thing he said came at the end of the interview. He leaned forward, smiled, and said, "I didn't push the last one." When asked what he meant, he replied, "She climbed in herself." No one knew what to make of that. Lily, still recovering, denied it. She said he'd attacked her. But doctors noted something curious: her hands and arms were covered in scratches that looked self-inflicted. Her shoes had traces of soil consistent with the rim of the well, not the ground around it. It didn't make sense. The prosecutor built the case carefully. DNA, the photographs, the personal effects, all pointed to Douglas as the killer. But one question remained unanswered: why? Douglas never gave a reason. Not even in court. He just said the women didn't belong out here. Whatever that meant. He was convicted on 6 counts of murder and sentenced to life without parole. The Hale farmhouse was demolished. The well was sealed in concrete and fenced off by the county. But that didn't stop the stories. People in Waverly still say you can hear crying from under the ground at night, especially after it rains. And sometimes, if you walk past where the well used to be, you can smell something faint and sour in the dirt, like something trying to come back up. As for Lily Cross, she disappeared again 2 years later. Left her group home without telling anyone where she was going. All they found was her phone, abandoned at a bus stop on Route 17. And that's the thing about Willow Farm. The drought dried the land, but it didn't kill what was underneath. Some things stay buried for a reason. And when they finally come up for air, they don't always let go.